Noon CPAC GB. Very exciting. What a historic occasion. Are there any Guardian reading, tofu eating, wokarati in the room? Let's just get it over and done with now. I heard some noise over there. You're looking like the naughty ones, the naughty corner over there. Wasn't it lovely to hear Jacob? So Jacob was exactly. Can't applaud him enough. Dear friend of mine, and we worked together in government for many years trying to fight the lefty blob. I just wish he would see the light and understand that the Conservative Party, I'm afraid, is dead. And the only way to stop Labour, to bring an end to socialism, will be to vote reform at the next general election. To everyone on the right, no one else can do it. So, Jacob, if you're listening, I've given you the warning. Anyway, it is an honour to be with you at this first CPAC event in the United Kingdom. Thank you and congratulations to Liz Truss and her fantastic team for convening and for making this important, vital conference possible. It is absolutely essential that thinkers, experts, leaders of the right come together and work together, because we need to be loud, we need to be brave, we need to be smart to win, because millions of people out there in the United Kingdom are depending on us. They are crying out for the right to keep fighting and for us to win. And this is where it starts. So thank you, Liz, and to the team at CPAC. Now, I want to talk to you this afternoon about a crisis of a generation, a crisis that neither Conservative or Labour governments have bothered to do anything about. Yet it's a crisis that affects millions of innocent, millions of young, millions of those even not yet born. It's a crisis of the forgotten, the overlooked, and the inconvenient, frankly. It's a crisis that doesn't tick the fashionable boxes that preoccupy the liberal elites. I want to talk to you about our white working class children, and in particular, our boys. Boys and girls whose grandparents and great-grandparents mined our coal, built our ships, ran our factories, and fought our wars. Because the brutal truth is that we are failing them, not by accident, but through neglect. We are failing them through the deliberate choices of a political and educational establishment that has decided that some children's disadvantage matters more than others. And that's a hard thing to say. I'll be called divisive by people who have never set foot in Rochdale or Jaywick or the estates of Newcastle and Doncaster. But I did not enter public life to say comforting things. I entered it to say true things. And this is a truth that we have avoided for far too long. There are 1.2 million white British children from disadvantaged backgrounds in our schools today. And they are, on every measure, the worst performing group in the English educational system. Only 36% of white British pupils on free school meals achieve a grade 4 or above in English or maths GCSE, against 72% of their better-off classmates or Black and Asian kids. Barely 1 in 7 reaches a good grade 5. Only half of these children reach a good level of development by the end of reception. Even before they've had a fair chance to begin, they're behind. And the gap does not close as they grow older. It widens. It widens at primary school. It widens again at secondary school. By the time they sit their GCSEs, only half as many white working class children achieve that crucial grade 4 as their better off peers. Young, white British male pupils on free school meals are the least likely to go to university. They're more likely to be in NEET, not in education, employment, or training. We've got 1 million of those now, in between 18 to 24 years old. They're more likely to end up in prison or have a mental health problem. And suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50. Now, these children are also absent from school nearly twice as much as the national average, and are 2.5 times more likely to be severely absent. Only 50% of them believe that they're likely to go to university, against 80% of children from other classes and other ethnicities. They've looked at the system and concluded, rightly, that it wasn't built with them in mind. And they're right. An independent inquiry into white working-class children found that our education system is simply not set up to serve the needs of white working-class children or families. And we're not underserving them by oversight or accident. We're just not serving them at all. Why has this happened? Well, the story of these children cannot be divorced from the story of the places that they come from. The coalfields, the mill towns, the coastal resorts that once thrived but now stand empty. In 1970, manufacturing, construction, and agriculture were nearly half of our national output. Today, they're a fraction of that. Those jobs gave dignity, purpose, wages to a generation of working men, and then they simply vanished. And nothing of equal worth was built in their place. Their parents, many of them who had bad experience of school themselves, failed to trust the education, and so didn't encourage learning at home. But not because they didn't care, but because the system never gave them a reason to believe that it cared for them. Only 48% of white working-class parents say they communicate regularly with their children's schools, compared with 60% of white middle-class parents and 68% of non-white working-class parents. So even there, in the most basic relationship between home and school, this community is falling through the gap. This is not a story of low aspiration. This is not a story of laziness, as some would believe. This is not a story that some might sneer at from their North London chambers. It is a story of geography, of economic abandonment, and of institutions that have quietly stopped believing that these children are worth the effort. Now, upstream of this crisis lies the political culture and the laws that were supposed to instill equality, but instead have engendered division, unfairness, and exclusion. The Equality Act was passed with good intentions in 2010, in the dying days of the last Labour administration. Its aim was to end discrimination and to open doors that had for far too long been shut to minority groups and women. But intentions are not outcomes. And across our public institutions, the duties imposed by this legislation led to the establishment of the diversity, equality, and inclusion industry. The Act introduced the concept of protected characteristics, where you're defined more by the color of your skin, your gender, or your age, rather than the content of your character. It introduced duties, legally binding duties of positive action, and the public sector equality duty, enshrined in law, in black and white. And over the last 20 years, these duties have time and time again tipped over into plain discrimination, legitimizing anti-white racism and anti-male sexism, eroding the concept of meritocracy, equality before the law, or personal responsibility. And these perverse outcomes, many of you will know of them. There's too many to list, but here are just a few. An employment tribunal found that Thames Valley Police had unlawfully discriminated against white officers after a non-white colleague was promoted without competition because of their ethnicity. Cheshire Police was found to have directly discriminated against a white heterosexual man. RAF, the Royal Air Force, recruitment targets aiming at 40% female, 20% ethnic minority by 2030 were found to unlawfully discriminate against men. We've seen internships at the Bar Council, the Intelligence Service, and the NHS, sometimes funded by the taxpayer, all of them open only to ethnic minority candidates. As Home Secretary, I was horrified when chief constables, the main culprits of two-tier policing, issued mea culpas of being institutionally racist, unjustifiably maligning thousands of decent men and women who are brave and put their lives on the line day in, day out to keep everyone safe. Police chiefs also asked me to fund and support their now notorious Race Action Plan back in 2022. I read it. It was a document riddled with appeasement, anti-white prejudice, and which made a mockery of the doctrine of policing without fear or favor. It urged, in explicit terms, not even subtly, explicitly, it urged the police to treat black suspects more leniently than white suspects. Give some people the benefit of doubt, but not everyone. In terms, it stated not to treat everybody the same way. You can imagine my response. I blocked it. I said to the police chiefs, come back to me with a knife crime action plan. Come back to me with a shoplifting action plan. Then you'll get my support. I never heard from them again. And it is a source of deep regret that after I left office, that invidious race action plan was adopted by my successors and rolled out throughout the country. And it was in Hampshire Police Force in Southampton that this policy contained in the race action plan led to the indefensible response from the police to the murder of Henry Novak. They should be ashamed of themselves. Because the fear of being called racist has become overpowering and paralyzing, whether it's reducing the use of stop and search. That change was introduced by Tory Home Secretary Theresa May. Or those police officers doubting Henry Novak. This has distorted much of the public sector. And it's the same with our other great scandal, the grooming gang scandal. White, working-class girls, many of them in care, many of them vulnerable, targeted, abused, some girls as young as 10, gang raped by groups of largely Pakistani Muslim men in places like Rochdale or Rotherham, when ignored for years, because the victims were the wrong kind of victims. And police officers, social workers, and teachers refused, they didn't just fail, they refused to take action out of their fear of being called racist. And consider this two-tier Britain grew up under 14 years of the Conservative government. Not an accident, because it's the last Conservative government that embraced the mantra of multiculturalism and political correctness as part of its #BeNice politics. Never forget that it was Conservative MPs who confessed as a badge of honor, a badge of moral virtue, that they were beneficiaries of white privilege. They were Tory MPs who took the knee after George Floyd. There were Tory ministers in government who declared that trans women are women. Even as Home Secretary, when I dared to tackle grooming gangs, to state the problem and take action, it was my own Conservative MP colleagues who accused me of Islamophobia, not just the left. Now, I don't say this to stoke grievance. I say it because inequality has been embedded in our society precisely because of attempts to create equality. Attempts to be anti-racist have institutionalized anti-white racism. A whole swathe of the population is now excluded from opportunities by those preaching inclusion. A working-class boy from Sunderland, whose family have never owned a house, whose father may never have worked, is disadvantaged, full stop. And any policy, however well meant, that fails to see him because it's only looking at the color of his skin, is not equality. It's a new unfairness dressed up in the language of the old one. And that is precisely why Reform UK is the only party that has been frank, even if it's incurred backlash, frank about the inequality pervading our society, and promised to scrap the Equality Act. We're not just going to tinker or tweak or change around the edges. We're going to get rid of that pernicious piece of legislation. Now, of course, people must still enjoy workplace protections. I don't want anyone to be discriminated against or treated unfairly in the workplace, whether they're a pregnant woman or someone from an ethnic minority or an older person or a disabled person. We're not advocating that. Of course we're not. But let's build a country where no one is discriminated against because of the color of their skin, even white men. Now, the same unfairness that we've seen at the high level has crept into how we teach in our classrooms. And for a generation now, a certain fashionable orthodoxy, let's call it a dogma, has held that Britain's story is chiefly one of oppression, that our institutions are systems of evil, and that the answer to inequality is to instill guilt in our children and grievance in others. Now, I'm not against teaching our children the fullness of our history, the difficult chapters as well as the proud ones. A confident country can look honestly at its past, but there is a world of difference between honest history and a decolonized curriculum that tells a white working-class child whose family has never had a spare room, let alone an empire's fortune, that he carries some inherited privilege that he can see no evidence of in his life. That is not education. That is alienation, and in many cases, it's indoctrination. And it teaches exactly the wrong lesson to exactly the wrong child at exactly the moment he most needs someone and something to believe in. So instead of teaching our children about how evil the British Empire was, or how racist the St. George's flag is, or how Easter should be cancelled for not being inclusive enough, that actually happened in a school in Hampshire. They cancelled their Easter parade because it wasn't inclusive enough. Or how a child can't wear a Union Jack dress to celebrate their culture. That also actually happened in a school in Warwickshire. A Reform UK government will roll out a patriotic and balanced curriculum in all of our schools. Instead of Refugee Week and schools flying the LGBTQ+ flag or the Palestinian flag, under a Reform government, every school will be obliged to fly the Union Jack. It's proved to be quite controversial. It's shocked me. The Conservative Party doesn't agree with it. You go to other countries, go to America. Everywhere there's a flag. They're so proud of their national flag. It's everywhere, and they fly it with pride. From the schools to the churches to the houses, it's everywhere. And yet, we've got local councils in the United Kingdom pulling down the St. George's flag because it's intimidating. We've got it wrong in this country, and we need to turn it around. So let's get back to teaching traditional hymns. Let's get back to teaching our great authors and thinkers. Let's get back to teaching of largely a Christian character, which is actually a requirement in the law. Let's show our children what patriotism looks like, what it looks like to be proud of their country and their culture. Let's teach the greats of our history without apology. And how do we actually lift these children out of the poverty trap? Well, we have to tackle head-on the contempt that's embedded in our society for anything other than the academic path. For every 3 young people who go to university, only 1 receives a proper vocational education. In Germany, the ratio is 1 to 1. In the Netherlands, it's 2 to 1. Because since Blair, We've spent 30 years telling every child that the road to dignity runs through the lecture hall and the mortarboard, and precious little effort telling them that it runs just as truly through an apprenticeship, a workshop, or a trade. And it's simply not true that the academic road pays best or is the right one for everyone. A young person who completes a good level 4 apprenticeship is, 5 years later, on the data, earning some £12,500 more than a graduate of a low-value university course, £5,000 more than the average graduate, and without a penny of student debt. We've built a system and a snobbery to go with it that treats technical trainees as second-class citizens, and the graduate, whatever he studied, wherever he studied it, as a first-class citizen. That is wrong. And to young, aspirational, bright, hardworking people that I meet out there, and if you're listening today, I say beware. Beware of the great university con. Avoid at all costs those worthless degrees at mediocre universities, which will saddle you with £50,000 worth of debt. And today, with 700,000 graduates who are unemployed, provides little guarantee of a good job afterwards. Because this is not merely an economic failure, it is a moral one. When a working-class boy cannot see a credible route from school into a skilled trade, a secure job, a wage that he can build a life on, he rightly asks, what is the point of it all? Dozens of teachers have told me this, that there are boys who are not lacking in ambition. What they lack, in their words, is a pathway between the classroom and adulthood. We took away the shipyards, we took away the pits, we took away the factories and the apprenticeships that once came with them, and we replaced that ladder with nothing but the promise of a degree that many of these children, quite reasonably, do not want and cannot afford. So we need to rebuild that ladder, rung by rung. Real technical education, properly funded and properly respected. GCSE retake systems that do not condemn a boy to repeated demoralizing failure. Remember, 200,000 of our young people will fail English and Maths GCSE every year. But instead, we need to build recognized transferable skills. A genuine right to sport and enrichment at every school, of the kind private schools have, always taken for granted, and state schools have too often gone without. And we also need to stop demonizing men, masculinity, and boys. Even before the wrong-headed adolescence drama on our TV screens, too many schools have been focused on telling boys how toxic they are, how inherently toxic they are, and how the patriarchy needs to be defeated. You know, misogyny is unacceptable, but so is misandry. And so we need good men, more good men in our classrooms, on the sports pitches, in the workshops, and in our families. Because a boy who never sees a man value hard work will rarely value it in himself. Parity of esteem, parity of funding between the academic and the technical path, real apprenticeships, real technical colleges, and an end to the polite fiction that university is the only road to success. Now, none of this is a counsel of despair. Across the country, I've seen schools and colleges and communities turning the tide, teachers building cultures of high expectations and belonging, young people motivated and thriving in education. When children are recognized and supported and believed in, they thrive. That much we know to be certain. But it won't happen by accident, and there is so much more that needs to be done. And it won't happen while our politics remains too frightened to name the problem for what it is. This is not about resentment. It's not about turning one community against another's. It is about the oldest and simplest principles of British fairness, that a child should be judged supported and given opportunity according to his need and his character, not isolated, favored, or overlooked according to the color of his skin. The boy from a pit village and the girl from a coastal estate are not privileged, and they're one of the most disadvantaged in our country. And it's time that our politics, our schools, and our laws treated them that way. We owe them more than pity. We owe them more opportunity. We owe them honesty. And above all, we owe them a country in which anyone can succeed, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what your parents did, regardless of how big your house was or what school you went to, regardless of the color of your skin. That is the Britain that I believe in, and that is the dream that we can all make possible. Thank you. Thank you.